Hello there. My name is Kieran Hanley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Newfoundland and Labrador Environmental Industry Association in my day job, but I moonlight volunteering with the Economic Developers Association of Newfoundland and Labrador as its Vice President. And wearing that hat, I'm really excited to present this session to our members and other interested stakeholders on behalf of our Board of Directors. The skill and proficiency of economic developers in this province is never going to be more important than it is in the years ahead of us. Newfoundland and Labrador was already facing immense challenges, even before the oil prices plummeted and even before the onset of the pandemic last year. Now we are definitely in a tight spot, and it's for sure an all hands on deck situation. Economic developers are on the very front lines of the growth of our communities, our businesses, our industries, and the economy at large. We work for federal, provincial, and municipal governments. We work for boards of trades and chambers of commerce. We work within institutions and community groups. And like in my case, we work on behalf of industry. But our ultimate goal is the same: success for Newfoundland and Labrador. And many of the strategies that we deploy, although in different contexts, are similar despite the variability in their application. EDANL knows from experience that there is no limit to what economic developers can achieve. They are restricted only by their passion, their creativity, and their skill set. Luckily, Newfoundland and Labradorians are born with no shortage of passion and creativity, but skills are learned, and there are best practices and tactics that can make our work more effective. Our needs in that regard are unique in this province, and access to resources to help meet those specific needs can be a challenge. So this is why EDANL set out last year to do a piece of work that would help us to understand how we as an association could provide the resources that economic developers in this province need to meet their, and by extension the province's, potential. To help us lay the groundwork for that, we hooked up with Dr. Tom Cooper. Dr. Cooper lectures at Memorial University in the areas of strategy, risk management, management consulting, and ethics and values. He's a decorated professional with research that has been published widely in industry and academic publications. He has an excellent way of turning complex undertakings into practical ones, and has a diverse background working within the realms of academia, the public sector, and the private sector, all that have made him the perfect candidate to help us with this work. And so with all of that context, I'm going to hand things over to Tom, who is going to take us through his work. And then afterwards, we're just going to have a brief discussion, a few questions and a few answers, just to explore what this means for EDANL as an organization, and what it means for the economic development profession in Newfoundland and Labrador going forward. So with all that said, take it away, Tom.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Kieran. Thank you so much to the board who worked with me extensively on this project. Thank you to all the people who spoke to me and the whole EDANL membership in terms of making this project reality. It's interesting, we started this project before the pandemic, and we were kind of in the process of getting the scope of the literature review and all that kind of all in one place when the pandemic hit. And moreover, we could really see the importance of economic development and economic development in a professional manner because of what has occurred over the last year. So the summary report I'm going to take you through is part of a much larger report, but hopefully there'll be some key learnings that you can take from this. Once again, you know, my day job is kind of like Kieran. I wear a bunch of different hats, but my day job is as I'm a professor at Memorial, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that may come outside of this from the membership if you'd like to reach out and ask me, etc. But what I'm going to do now is just basically take you through some of the key findings that are outlined in the summary report, and hopefully you can start to get a better understanding of what we were trying to do. So we started off with the title of Review of the Skills, Knowledge, and Training Needs of Economic Development Professionals in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we started off with a broad strategic question. Jennifer Penny, Kieran, and I sat down and we just basically asked the question, what are those skills, knowledge, and training that economic development professionals need in Newfoundland and Labrador. And ultimately, we started to look, and we started to explore. And it was very much kind of a exploratory piece of work to begin with, and we kind of narrowed it down as we went along. So with that kind of exploration, though, as we started to break it down, is that what are the training needs? Because Newfoundland and Labrador is a unique and wonderful and beautiful place. And in that uniqueness and wonderfulness and beauty, there is some unique challenges, especially on fiscal and economic side. There's social challenges, there's geographic challenges, but at the same time, looking at things from a risk-based lens, there's also opportunities in terms of how do we fiscally move the province forward, how do we think about the social demographics challenges that we're dealing with, and how ultimately do we overcome issues of geography. And that's some of the questions that, or some of the feedback that I was able to get both through the questionnaires and through the interviews that were conducted. The second question, which has kind of answered itself over the last year because of the fundamental change in terms of what the pandemic has brought about, is what is the best delivery model for training and professional development? And I'll go to the answer to that. It's basically, it's hybrid these days. You know, ultimately, I think everyone has gotten used to being on Zoom and WebEx and Teams and Skype and any other type of video services, etc. There's a whole bunch of different delivery models now. And really the answer is what is the best delivery model really depends on the content and what you're teaching and what you're trying to put forward to economic development professionals. We'll get into that later on as we go through the report. So the first thing that we did in terms of, we looked at basically what's going on in the field of economic development, both in the province and elsewhere. And we wanted to make sure that we're really clear when we're asking questions around skill, knowledge, and training, what is really necessary for economic development professionals in the province. We looked through all the available literature. We spent a lot of time with Google and the library and going through what are some of the existing economic development frameworks. We sent out a survey to the whole of the membership, and we got a fairly good response given the pandemic, talking about what they thought in terms of what are those skills, knowledge, and training. And then there was a whole bunch of key informant interviews with some really great thought leaders and great thinkers in the field. And then we came up with a series of recommendations. So in terms of the scan of the literature, there is no specific learning framework or strategy for economic development professionals that's completely applicable to what we have here in the province. The absence of a framework doesn't mean that's not important. It's just, you know, once again, there's nothing specific that says this is what you need here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Both the interviews and the surveys had, as I mentioned before, in terms of had similar answers around what is the best delivery mechanism. But ultimately, one of the other key findings, and we're going to talk about this kind of at the end of the presentation, is that historically there's been a tendency for economic development professionals in Newfoundland and Labrador to be reactionary rather than proactive. And this in VUCA world, which we talk about, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, sorry, I probably didn't say that right, but ambiguous, we may need to be more proactive. So what do we mean by that? And how do we help that be achieved through the knowledge, skills, and training? The survey provided some really enlightening and compelling viewpoints. We had clarity around issues and trends emerging. The interviews were also very similar, and they talked a little bit about, even beyond the survey, importance of the breadth of sectoral knowledge, the importance of cultural understanding, opportunity management, as well as the history of economic and community development here in Newfoundland and Labrador. If I was going to sum up what we need from economic development professionals here in the province is to be strategic. And by strategic is understanding that link between community economic development. and making sure that you're thinking long-term. And that long-term is what's going to be beneficial not only in the next 6 months, but in the next 5 years and sometimes 10 years. It's also important to understand based on, although as Karen mentioned, there's so many different types of people who are part of the economic developers network as part of the association. It's overwhelming municipal, and context then is very important. So the link between community economic development is probably even more so than we see in other jurisdictions, both here in North America and elsewhere around the world. And history is really important because stuff has worked in the past and stuff has not worked in the past. Now, ultimately understanding that history and understanding that context also means in terms of what have we done, the power shifts, and what has worked and what's not worked. So the importance of knowledge management and reflecting good practice and also reflecting lessons learned was really important in terms of trends, issues, and opportunities within different sectors and within all of the economic development within the province. So ultimately, the report came down to 3 recommendations. And number 1 is creating a learning framework that reflects all your feedback and reflects the good practice that we've seen throughout, both in terms of the survey, the review of the literature, and as well as the interviews. And basically, if I was going to articulate this vision, you can see it in this diagram here, where we talk about the importance of context, secondly, looking through issues and opportunity identification, and then analysis and value proposition development and impact to results. So understanding the context, if you're operating in LaCie is going to be different than if you're operating in Labrador, which is going to be different than if you're operating in Metro St. John's. So what's the context in terms of what you're doing with economic development? Secondly, how do you look at an issue and opportunity identification and say that's going to work for the organization that you're representing or for the for whomever you're working for? So what are those issues and how do we and identify that opportunity? And as Karen mentioned at the beginning, the world has changed. And one of the great things about this technology is that geography in some ways has become more accentuated and has also become more irrelevant in terms of how we communicate, how we deal, and how do we engage with people as well. But we still need to make sure that the issues and opportunity identification that's done is robust and it makes sense for the context within which we're operating in. Thirdly, there needs to be one of the things that an interesting comment came from one of the interviews where we said, well, when we were back in the 1970s, there was more evidence-based learning around economic development than we actually see now. And I'm not, obviously I was a child in the 1970s, so I'm not sure how exactly accurate it is, but I think it points to the point of evidence-based in terms of the analysis and the value proposition development around the opportunities and issues that we're pursuing as economic development professionals. And that's really important so that they're developed, they're not just, this is a good idea, let's go forward with it. And ultimately there's some thinking, there's some analysis, there's some value proposition development. And then ultimately, once again, trying to understand what the impact and the results are, where there's been success, where there's not been success, and why. And then making sure that that's communicated and there's going to be engagement with the relevant stakeholders, with the communities you represent, with the stakeholders you represent. And there's also going to be monitoring and reporting around what's working, what isn't working, and sharing that within the awesome network of economic development professionals that we have here in the province. And recommend too, in terms of level of training, there was a lot of kind of feedback around saying, hey, we need more around some micro skills around meeting management or social media or, how do you do project management, et cetera. And so what we divided in terms of kind of 3 levels of training, micro, meso, and macro. And macro was really around what is economic and community development here in Newfoundland, Labrador. So what does it mean to be an economic development professional here in Newfoundland? We talked about one of the other feedback that we got both from the surveys and interviews is around capacity, placemaking, and opportunity management. When we get, so those are the macro things that are really, really important within here in Newfoundland, Labrador, and that was some of the continual feedback that we got. The next thing is in terms of the meso level, which is kind of maybe the mid-tier level, which is around planning, proposal and project development, sector knowledge, issues and trends, government relations, stakeholder, and partnership development, as well as community development as well. So those are very specific to the context within which we operate in Newfoundland and Labrador. There is obviously applicability to other jurisdictions and to other parts of Canada and elsewhere. But very much in terms of is unique in some cases to Newfoundland and Labrador. The micro skills around core economic and community development and core business and management skills, in a number of ways, a lot of those are already being offered, whether it's the Gardner Center, the College of North Atlantic. There's so many different ways now of getting training online. And moreover, I guess in a number of ways, it's going to be, if that can be outsourced to a trusted third party, would probably make more sense than developing specifically for economic development professionals here in the province. So, and it's really important that in all these modules that there's a broadening of the mind whereby other jurisdictions, case studies, good practices, identified success and failures are brought into learning experience. And those practical examples, not just theoretical, which obviously as a business school professor I like to talk about, but also in terms of what does that practically mean for economic development professionals becomes really, really important in terms of the levels of training and the types of training that are required. And also the delivery models, once again, when we started this project, it was kind of pre-pandemic, and those lessons, although the world has changed significantly in the last year in terms of how you do delivery models around training and teaching and learning, there's still going to be a combination of case studies, simulations, blended, some remote components. Face-to-face delivery is great, depending on the types of learning that you're doing, discussions, peer-to-peer learning, so many different types. And really the answer is it depends on the content. But ultimately, we almost go through a learning pyramid where just listening to lectures is not going to cut it for everybody. In a number of ways, discussions, practice doing, demonstration, all those sort of things is really going to help in terms of the retention and making sure that as economic development professionals, you can take things forward. So in summary, there was a lot of trends and themes emerging from the training. If I was going to extrapolate that in terms of how economic development professionals in Newfoundland and Labrador have to operate, there was a real kind of a great phrase of going from being proposal writers to being translators. What around these opportunities and around these issues and around these trends, what do stakeholders need? So stakeholders can be communities, can be industry groups, it can be different organizations that you're representing. So what do they need? What do they want? How do you put it on the ground? And that's the natural evolution of the profession, moving beyond proposal writers to really translators. And moreover, this evolution will see economic development professionals less involved in maybe selling and ultimately being more strategic. And that may mean articulating an attachment to an area. What makes it special? Creating a vision for success. And we live in a special place here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I think that's always really important. As someone who's lived elsewhere around the world, I think we need to always keep that in the back of our mind. Just like we live in a relative Shangri-La when it comes to living with COVID-19, we also have to think when we're living with economic development, there is lots and lots of opportunities out there. It's just in terms of how we frame them, how we think about them, and trying to drive that attachment that we have to this beautiful place that we live in is very, very important. And so reinforcing and acquiring those fundamental skills that make successful economic development processes, projects, and opportunities, and making sure that you have those training and skills to be better translators rather than salespeople is one of the things that we talk about in the report. Being a trusted broker. If you're chasing money in smokestacks, that's only going to get you so far. So you need to translate a vision and articulate that vision for communities and stakeholders. But moreover, making sure that Newfoundland and Labrador government is not going away, even if there is the fiscal challenges that we have. You need to be able to engage with, ensure with all different levels of government whether it's, and think about, ultimately, what is the best model? But more than likely, because of the fiscal and economic challenges that we're living within, government will become a partner rather than a metaphorical parent in economic development. So we can think of community ownership, whether it's private or social enterprise, will be part of the future of economic development in Newfoundland Labrador. So that's going to be shifting on policies. That could be thinking about what is our piece of the pie rather than do we own the whole pie? Is this aligned with our strategy? What are we going to do and what are we not going to do? So coming up with a vision, a realistic plan will be essential for economic and community development. We heard some great feedback about the University of Waterloo and their program. There was no need to recreate the wheel there. But once again, making sure that it translates here to the province and taking what's the best practice that we've seen coming out of the University of Waterloo and their economic development program, and then making some that there's things that we can add on here to the province. And for those people who cannot afford to go to Waterloo, then having kind of micro summary courses where we can get a couple of those, get some of that learning translated here to the province as well. Tactical knowledge and training such as data and trends analysis, opportunity management, basic business skills, how we deal with a whole bunch of different areas, once again, is going to be reflected in terms of the strategy that's going to be proposed and how we take forward this study and put it on the ground. But we still can't take away from the fact that one of the key things that was fed back to us all the time was the importance of the network and how making sure that economic development professionals can get together, they can talk, they can learn from each other, and make sure that they can drive forward this in the province. How can they create that dialogue? How can they understand what has worked and why? What are some of the different models that we're seeing throughout the province in terms of opportunities? What's the history of economic and community development in Newfoundland Labrador? And establish a dialogue of not blame as to what do we want to do, what is holding us back, how do we overcome it, and moreover, what makes us different are really essential for success. And it was a great project to work on. It was really enlightening. It was amazing to work with Kieran and Jennifer and the board and to get people's feedback. And I'm very happy to answer any questions now, Kieran. And I guess, do we go to stop share? Would that be probably the best thing to do? Or do you want to see this last summary slide and then go forward from there?
Yeah, no, stop share if you wish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for all the work you did for us. We're super pleased with the work, and there were some things that we never would have thought of and never would have considered ourselves without having that kind of objective third-party look at this. And one of the things we knew going in was we really had to narrow in on things that were important and special to this place, because we don't want to duplicate anything that's out there, number one. There's some fantastic resources available through Waterloo and through the National Economic Developers Association. We don't want to get, we don't want to get in any of that territory, but ultimately, what happens, say, in the city of Calgary around economic development, or even if you're near a city the size of Calgary, it's a very different situation than if you're in Newfoundland. There's all sorts of different unique challenges and opportunities, and we want to thread that needle pretty carefully. And one finding which kind of really fascinated me was this idea that we have to teach context and teach a little bit about the history of economic development here. I just wanted to get your opinion on why it's important for us to, as economic developers, to have that context, to be able to look backwards to see what's been done and what got us from 1970 to 2021. And
it's a great question, Karen. And it was, for me, it was one of the findings that history and context and institutional knowledge, I guess, maybe is a good way of economic development here in the province. There's been things that have worked really well. If we look at the growth of the tourism industry here in the province, for example, it's amazing when we think about what's gone on in the last 20 years. So kudos to all the economic development professionals in that field. But there's other sectors where, sometimes the timing is bad, and we could say, and sometimes the ownership is bad. One of the classic cases that from my childhood that I remember is Sprung Greenhouse, right? When you think about it, and we all laugh, right? It was like this beacon of light coming out of Mount Pearl, and it was a huge project, and it really brought down a provincial government. And we were all saying, like hydroponics and blah blah blah. That doesn't make sense now. But now, you go 30 years into the future, and we're talking about food security more and more. We're talking about how do we have local products that we can consume and that can generate local economic benefits, rather than our blueberries coming from Chile or our zucchini coming from South Africa. And ultimately, if we look at food as an economic development issue, we may say, well, Sprung Greenhouse didn't work, so it won't work, hydroponics won't work anymore. But there's been lots of cases now locally where there's been some really innovative hydroponic and greenhouse type products, etc. So if you don't understand the history, you may dismiss out of hand, well, we can't do that. Or, rather than saying, okay, well, let's look at what really went on last time. Was it a question of scale? Was it a question of ownership? Was it a question of governance? Was it a question of product? And really trying to say, okay, well, how do we make sure that we take advantage of these new opportunities or now, but we don't replicate what we did in the past? And whether that's around technology, agriculture, fisheries, tourism, mining, there's so many ways that, once again, that the knowledge is there, the experience is there. We've tried a huge number of things here in the province. I mean, kudos to the risks that were taken, right? And a lot of them were, but now and like in any time you're involved in a project and you're looking at the risks that you've taken, you look and say, well, what worked and what didn't and why didn't it work? And so I think context is really important. We have a lot of experience here. And I think a lot of that experience can really demonstrate what worked and didn't work and why, and how do we make sure that we promote the successes and understand where there has not been as successful and why.
I find too, the having that historical context helps you navigate relationships and helps you navigate projects from the perspective of developing partnerships and whatnot. When I started my career in this field, it was after the regional economic development boards had, well, I guess right at the end of their life is when I started my career in economic development. And I was really lucky to have a couple of mentors who kind of steered me in the direction of the work of an economic developer and gave me some of that background as to what has transpired in the past. So moving forward, when I'd be talking to somebody and they said, oh yeah, I used to work for one of the Red Bees, right away, I knew kind of how I might want to approach that discussion or kind of that partnership, knowing kind of some of the things that they'd gone through in their career. And it's been so helpful for me. And I think that it'd be really interesting for all of us to share this kind of historical information on kind of what we've done and where we've gone. I know for me, it's certainly served me really well, and I'm really excited at the opportunity for everyone to share all of kind of what they've done in the past to help us move on in the future.
And there's been amazing different organizational forms around economic development, whether it's the Economic Recovery Commission back in the early 1990s, or the Red Bees, or even you come back into the 1970s where there's commissions of inquiry around different projects, etc. And when we look at large-scale industrialization, for example, which was kind of the impetus of the Smallwood government in terms of economic development, that brought, we could say, okay, well, do we do that again? That brought a lot of jobs, but is that something that worked here for whatever reason, right? And so we shouldn't have to recreate the wheel in terms of looking at issues and opportunities, et cetera. We should be able to say, let's look at what we've done before. Let's go to those people who've been around, and most of it is still within living memory, and there's still a lot of people, and some of them are retired. But trying to capture some of that knowledge and making sure that we really take advantage of the learning and the experience, and moreover, the time and effort and money that's been invested in economic development here in the province over the last 60 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's a small place, right? It's a small province. So the folks that have the passion and the wherewithal to pursue economic development are likely, in that same community that existed, 20, 30, even 40 years ago. So there's all sorts of things that we can learn, and knowing where those flashpoints have been in kind of the economic development life for Newfoundland and Labrador, whether it's structured or kind of organic, really helps to set the proper context.
Which ties into the importance of the network, as I mentioned at the end.
Yeah.
Like, who's your mother? Who's your father? Where are you from? Which is kind of the traditional Newfoundland and Labrador greetings, which some people find intrusive, and I can understand that. But that curiosity around people, that curiosity around where are you from and who do you know, is something that I don't think we really we monetize, or really, sorry, monetize, you may say, but what I mean, we don't see that value of that network sometimes. Even somewhere like take, for example, personalized medicine and genetics and genomics, which I think the province has a huge opportunity on in terms of economic development. And you can say, well, that's really new. There's people like, we're working on this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Now we can go back and say, okay, well, what were the barriers? Why didn't it work as well 20, 25 years ago? And there has been elements of success. In Grand Falls, Windsor, there's the center there that does specific work, et cetera. But, you take, just because something is new, sometimes it's just a reframing of something that's been done before. And if we can go back and take a look at it before and say, okay, well, what worked, what didn't work? And moreover, we know that the context has changed now. And understanding just because something didn't work in the past doesn't mean it won't work now. But we want to make sure that the context is correct, and it's the right time, the right place to pursue this opportunity and to take the risk in terms of taking it forward.
So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but next steps, like where as an organization do you think we go from here? What should our next thing be?
I think first of all, I think taking and implementing some of those training and learning suggestions. So developing a couple of those courses, making sure that they're available. I think making sure that the development of the courses is collaborative and it's ongoing and there's continuous improvement all the time. Having a toolbox, or for those people of a certain age, I'll date myself, but as Mr. Dressup once said, having a tickle trunk of stuff that you can go back and take a look at and saying what's worked and hasn't worked, and really kind of, once again, building the network and building the community of economic development professionals here in the province. And ultimately understanding that economic development professionals are going to be so important in the next 10, 15 years. And it's not what's happened in the last year, what's happened in the last 5 years has really shown the importance of when you're worrying about tax revenue rather than worrying about how do we grow the overall economy, can cause issues in terms of our ability to be resilient and our ability to pivot and ability to have a diversified portfolio. And so ultimately, economic development professionals, I think the key word for me is professionals. And the more and more professional that economic development can come, and professionalism is around integrity, it's around sharing, it's around understanding that, yes, we operate in a competitive environment, but we also operate in a collaborative environment. And collaboration comes through learning skills and making sure that everybody's on the same page and that we all understand the different opportunities. We all have the ability to assess those opportunities, take them forward, and to make them happen within the different jurisdictions, groups, communities, industry that we belong to. Well,
you pretty effectively summarized exactly why we went about this work. Really wanted to thank you for everything you've done, and we're looking forward to taking those next steps this year to put some of this in place. Before I let you go, I also want to thank all of our members who participated in all the surveys and the folks that we've really bugged to have some of those one-on-one interviews to give us all their insight and background and expertise. So thanks to all, and we'll see you soon again with an update on where we are in the development of training and professional resources for economic developers in Newfoundland and Labrador.